Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am very excited to welcome two poets this evening, Alice B Fogel with her new book. Oh, it disappeared. Her new book, Nothing But. She is joined in reading with L.R. Berger, whose new book is also newly available, Indebted to Wind. Both of these books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. We are very happy to sell them to you online, over the phone, in person. We do ship, very happy to do so. Thank you so much to the two of you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. I was on mute.
So I'm ready for some poetry. To our audience members, we will be answering questions later in the event. If you would like to put some into the chat sidebar or the Q&A function, we will get to those. And I believe the two of you have decided that LR will read first. So without further ado, let's have some poetry.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And hello, everyone. Thank you for being what we now call here in this Zoom world. I'm really grateful to Elizabeth, who was a wonderful coach around the tech and all else, and also to Gibson's, who rounded us all up for this evening. And I just feel so grateful to Alice for asking for me to read with her tonight. I've never given a reading on Zoom, so have mercy. I'm hoping this will go well. And how's the sound, Elizabeth?
You're coming in clear and sufficient volume.
Great, great. So I'm going to start with the title poem for this new book, which actually was written as almost the last poem that I wrote for the book, when I realized while compiling the collection that the character of wind had been threading its way unbeknownst to me in many of the poems. Indebted to wind. Not what it had to say, but what it carried to you. Dandelion silk dispatching seed, the neighbor's trash can lid, waking you from that nightmare hurled in a tempest against the bedroom window. Howling, love cry, lamentation. Wind carries out the past and in the future, tutors your own breath to extinguish the flame. When love unbuttoned your blouse, wind did the rest, fumbling through the aspens. You could have believed air was empty space to be lost in, except for wind, stinging your face at the height of January, whipping the flag, lifting the sparrow. So this next poem was written for those of us of a certain age. You know who you are. When our memory operating systems are being tampered with in incomprehensible ways. And I'm reading this poem for Santina. I can't see you, but I'm hoping you're here. Momentarily untitled. When did I come into, what did I come into this room for? The name of that restaurant, the street where she lives. What was it no one told me? The post office box won't open with my house key. I thought it was still August, but this is where I live. What was it, he said, that made me leave him? Wasn't there a grudge or two? Who gifted me that carved wooden monk on the windowsill? Her first name started with a G. Is my password still swallowtail? That shrub mock orange until I remember it's honeysuckle. Weren't there always mistaken identities? Did we see that movie? Did I enjoy it? Were his dying words to me everlasting joy or joy everlasting? So I was taking a long walk with a friend, an old friend, and we discovered, having never known this before, that we both had a fondness, I'd say a passion for words containing the letter P. And the poem started out really as a kind of gift, playful gift for her, a kind of joke. But as poems do, it took me into a totally unexpected territory. Because hope has only one P. Preposterous has two. So I use it whenever possible, but only as it pertains to improbable splendor in its particulars. This morning, it was one preposterously small boat whooping up the placid lake into stippled waves, thumping at the pilings. A passion for peas makes it easy to pick your favorite anything: animal, porcupine, nut, pistachio, French noun, parapluie. How do you think Prozac got so popular? The poet is early primed to parse past participles and pinch back superlatives. Prior to posthumous, pish on this. Let irrepressible play in P's backyard plenitude. That's where the pluck comes from, to take on those P's we believe we'd be better off without. Plutonium, apartheid, impoverish, corporate plunder. Take heart, it's the P in despot that patiently plots his toppling. All those P's underground operatives pledged to the painstaking piecework of our emancipation. P's ply under the radar, protected by their reputation for peace, polite, pretty please. They pack pitchforks for every possible impasse. P's have telescopic outlooks. They're at home with complexity, placed right there at the center of skeptical to trip over. Be a player. Apprentice yourself to the P chipping away at complacency, persecute, apocalypse. Sketch that blueprint for unprecedented parity. You who are also indispensable, because hope only has its one P, and there are no closing hours in this world's shop of perilous pastimes. This next poem was inspired early in the pandemic after one of those hideous press conferences. It's called The Pandemic Blues. The Pandemic Blues. What doesn't add up? What never did? Chin up, served up, screwed up. We're picking up all those pieces. Buttoned up, bottled up, corpses piling up and tallied, watching blown up each night on screens and channels. We're up in arms, coughing up the cover-up, slithering out from up their sleeves. We know by wrapping it up, they mean bringing it home. So the next poem, I was kind of waiting to find a way to write about the murder of George Floyd. And the wind came to help me. 38th and Chicago, which is, of course, where Floyd was murdered. 38th and Chicago, May 25th, 2020. They brought him down to the place where even wind couldn't save him. It tried. The wind gave him breath for, please, mama, please. But between that knee and his neck, there was no open passage for wind to wedge between them. Wind begged the mind belonging to that knee to come back from the country it was lost to. But that mind was drunk on dominion and clenched tight around whatever had killed the life-giving wind inside him a long time ago. So I heard from my friend Sandra today, and she asked me to read this poem. So this is for you, Sandra. Ask anybody. I am carrying on. Ask anybody. The only way to photograph wind is to catch it cool-handed, stirring something. Night's white nightgown flying pinned by a seam to the clothesline. On that secondhand bicycle of childhood, pumping hard, I could turn speed into wind. I made it to save me. Ask anybody. Wind is God's great source of subsequently visible gestures. I've been meaning to tell you the wind was so strong on Tuesday, I leaned into it, forging up the hill to the orchard as if pressing through something, as if moving forward, despite love was in the wind pushing in the other direction. Even the trees were carrying on, and words desiring each other, aspiring to be gestures. Forgive me. I'm always trying to pin one down on the page. Your left hand cupping the right side of my face before the movie, my chin at rest in your palm. You were drawing me toward you. Ask anybody. Like so many of us, I've had both the privilege and the deep sorrow of that pilgrimage, that form of accompaniment that sees the ones we love through their dying and into their last breath. I'm going to read this poem for Karen. The poem is in 8 parts. Palliative care. 1. What was going on in that room was going on in that room. Outside was the world that is always on fire and the world that always isn't. But we were there, we were. And God could sometimes be found in your final watercolor, propped up and facing us on the sill of the hospital window. Its suggestion of wintered trees fracturing banks of blue, while under a tent of white sheet, you fading like fugitive colors. 2. But not your eyes. They were steady blue flares up ahead on the gravel of Night's Back Road. Your smile slightly askew, offering itself to everybody, wheeling toward you through the revolving glass hospital doors. All my formerly nursed concerns were breathlessly confiscated. 3. Sometimes the heft of a word's true meaning comes to find us. Inside your room, 2 windows, 3 chairs, 1 word was enough. But have I done enough good? Was the only enough at first that concerned you until weeks later you rallied to protest. Enough is enough. Wearing the face of the jilted, you woke each morning to find death stood you up. Your doctor confiding, enough to kill a horse. Morphine enough. 4. Tuesday, you're a wooden broom. Wednesday, a sleeping prince. Fallen, nestling, featherless, still breathing, splayed on an asphalt driveway. Thursday. Saturday at dawn, yours is the still living face of Christ crucified. Sometimes the heft of a word's meaning comes to find us. Wind circling the hospital with something like intention. Whirlpool of winter, Saturday, refusing to lose its grip. 5. For weeks I neglected the moon. Walking home, I never thought to look at the sky. During the night, I was dreaming about birds we don't have, nightingales, magpies, cuckoos. Whatever comes next, we'll have to cross through an old growth forest to get there. 6. One of our last conversations concerned color. I pulled the cotton blouse from my closet to offer your eyes a blurry swatch of blue, chicory weed, forget-me-nots. What would we have done, you asked, without the companionship of blue? Then you looked off, squinting, that fixing of the eyes we hope sharpens our ears. Yours turn now to other frequencies. Someone's last breath down the corridor, the tolling of stars, vibrato of blue. 7. The bouquet of dahlias I brought weeks ago won't die. Do you really think it would be all right if I let go of everything? Once you stop breathing so long, I crossed the room whispering, finale meaning finally. Then you gasped like a newborn, gulping his first fist of air. 8. 40 days and no kidding, 40 nights. Sometimes the heft of a word's true meaning comes to find us. For a while it was affliction, but now it was now. Whatever comes next, we'll have to cross through an old growth forest to get there. Virgin forest, dappled light, yours, finally leaving us. And for the last poem, which I'm reading for Trisha in Ohio, Blue Yonder. The geese are going places, flying west in formation, low over the tidal marsh. We're all going places, some of us flying low under evening sky, closer to the place we all end up going. There was a time I wanted to go with them, watched them coursing south across a late October field. In the dream I woke from, crying, take me with you. My body that night, the place they were passing through. I can still hear them calling that they've flown though they've flown out of sight like the dead whom I also love, gone to their unimaginable places. Who knew I'd still be here, at home at last, feet to good earth? Good luck, I holler, with everything I've got, no trace of longing for any blue yonder. Thank you for your listening and for your presence, even though I can't see you.
Thank you so much, LR. Just really moving poems. I hope you get lots of people reading them, taking them in, because it will do them good. All right, I'm Alice, and I'm going to read from this new book of mine. See if you can see this beautiful cover. This is a painting by Robin Tedesco, and the full title of the book is actually Nothing But a Series of Indirect Considerations on Art and Consciousness. So just for a little bit of background, all the poems in this book are inspired by a particular, each poem is inspired by a particular piece of abstract expressionist art, except for a very few stuck in between that are just me speaking about my obsession with the art. And so at the back of the book, I list who the artists are and what their pieces are, so they are mostly findable. I have a document that I'm going to share with you in a minute that will show you some of the artwork for the ones that I'm reading, but the book doesn't have all of that in it, unfortunately, because, you know, poetry presses don't have the budget for that kind of thing. I wish that there was a different language or a different word that we could use for the different kinds of poems that there are. I think the best mindset for how to listen to these poems or read them is to imagine that you're listening to jazz at a concert, or maybe you're at the ballet and your mind is wandering and your thoughts are wandering through you as you watch, and your thoughts are sometimes responding directly to something that you're seeing or hearing, and other times flying in other directions. What I'm trying to mimic here is what happens when we are faced with something like an abstract expressionist painting, something totally mysterious, non-representational, that just makes us stop our stream of consciousness like that. And I love the opportunity to have that kind of experience. So this is why I'm obsessed with abstract expressionism, and for me, it's really transformative, and it's a form of transportation, actually. So that will tell you a little bit about what's going to happen here. So let me share my screen, and you'll see the first painting that I'm going to be reading the poem about. And I should say that, you know, I'm not describing these, like you might hear words, like I use the word rust in this poem. You might hear some words that are coming from what I'm looking at, but mostly I'm just jumping off of it and going somewhere. I just read this quote from the painter Joan Mitchell, where she said, "I would certainly never mirror nature in her painting," she means. "I would more like to paint what it leaves with me." So to me, that was really a good description of what happens to me when I'm writing a poem from these paintings. I just want to write what the painting leaves with me. I'm actually going to show you the poems so you can see how a lot of these poems look. They're on the page kind of like a painting in a frame. The 16th objective. The last time we were wild and afterwards flooded with rust and mud, we have no way of being sure. The suspended moment bloats beyond memory, like someone else's. Though what if it's not about that at all? What if we could be splendidly got and gasping for a spell, going to or coming from where the glow comes from? Unable to float up from down, we could be inside something difficult at the center of which is this scarily attractive glimpse of the endless stormlight just before or during the danger. Uh-oh. So then what brings us here where nothing is obvious and only? What makes it seem to go on and on? The depth or the idea? I'm gonna skip down to another one. So this is a kind of a diptych. It's one painting, but with two parts. And so the poem that goes with it. I'm very attracted to paintings that mostly just look like you dug them out of the ground, or maybe they got photographed from the cosmos or something. But I also wanted to use paintings that had a lot of playfulness and color. But if I saw a painting where I actually could say, oh, that looks like something, I wouldn't use that. I wanted it to really, really make my mind stop. So that's, actually, I'll leave that painting up and I'll read from the book. I do want to just show you the poem because it has two parts because of the layout of the painting in two boxes, two frames. It's called Untied. Who or what is it that doesn't love a stranger, someone we could stand before for hours or ever and never be able to name? Even at first sight, we get the withdrawal from whatever came first or followed, whatever affection for logic profiled. And what a line does is one kind of division, inviting what binds. It flirts with time. Time is always involved when there's a line. The before confessed, the promised after, a blind date so painfully perfect, so tenderly disturbing, it floats us. It makes us ridiculously happy to have any relationship at all to roses, to have bouquets of paint we can inhale so as to subtract the paint. Then, wow, let's pretend it was an accident that we ever met, a crazy coincidence that we recognize each other's iterations and want to disappear into their weave. We can't help ourselves. Now we can't keep our hands off the present. We want to tear apart the syntheses, unlace and spill their silky ribbons, rip the wrappings and fling pieces to confettied air, get at the scents and leave them with us when we go. Robin Tedesco is the artist who did the cover, and she does a lot of these kind of group paintings. And I just think her color is amazing. So, you know, what are these paintings about? They are not depicting what we would call, you know, they're not landscapes, they're not still lifes, they're not portraits. But I don't think that they're nothing. I think they're anything but, or nothing but. They are maybe even depicting nothing, the nothingness that happens inside of us when we turn off that stream of consciousness. But you could also say that they're about texture and light and color. They're about paint, just like poems are about words. So So I'm responding to, as you go through the book is a conversation. Each poem kind of keeps building up the dialogue about how to deal with these kinds of moments of being taken out of your mind. So this one is also on the page. I'll show that one. You'll adjust. Where are you going? Stay with us. Stay awake. Don't go making inroads or assumptions. Use the map provided. Where are you going? To look it up. It's all ridge, all whirlpool, no subclause. We can't even begin to describe how it moves all the time. It acts like it's still. Where would you go if it's time out of mind, a kind of temporal immortality to paint and more paint, to almost taste it when you try to speak through a crack in the reasoning, to what hinges, what sieves the mirrored valley as peered at from above. How far down it goes, how deep, the definition, its fact, the leap. Don't go to geology, to ledge, just go to the level of paint. It shouldn't even be possible to refuse what you see. I'm going to take you down to one of my favorite paintings. It's an encaustic by a painter, Martha Rhea Baker, who lives in Santa Fe. The poem is called 7 Times. What has already happened or never happened but could or will, like us, is enthralled to the divine madness of the possible. Use our imaginations. We'll inhale that veil. What is the word for what is not a color? We would offer it up in place of the vagrant probable. Never mind your color theory, your chaos, aesthetic. We are lucky to be this incoherent because what is the sense in the imp of the perverse inching towards the empirical? And anyway, what are the chances that could contour edgewise what we by turns layer and scrape in our craze to rend cause from effect, lose us in exchange for the parenthetical. Promise us we won't be gauche if we take colors more seriously than we take ourselves. Whether our devotion to these relative heavens relieves or reveals wouldn't be the last thing on our minds. I think I'll read, actually it's in here, let's do the blues. Because LR read something about blue, I thought I would do this one. So there's just a tiny thumbnail that I could get off of her website, Ellen Raleigh. You can see that I stole my own titles from the titles of the paintings. I kind of changed them around. This one is called Blues. Because we're tired to death of blue, how it is forever, as if benignly suggestive of depths, as if it had heft, infinitude, because it is always about some conceptual sky, as if there were virtue in beckoning the mortal to blame or abandon time. We want something more of blue, want a kind of blue that bears the limits of walls, a blue imbued with brazen bricks, flat, blackened, and not beholden to emptiness, contextual in its own frame. We want blue blurred, blue blatant, blues blunt and blared to bash our brain into. Its scarred substance, its thick skin and heavy heart, broken, horizoned, so much the matter of its own making, and blindly self-referential, like us, not even trying to, as if it could, brush past the fact, its burden of blue. I'll just read one more. And this one I don't have the image for. It's by a painter up in Burlington, Linda E. Jones, who also does stuff with encaustic. And it's her piece of art is called Unnamable. And I just used that name. This is the last poem in the book, which has taken you through all of these stilled moments of where did my thinking go, and what is consciousness, and how is it connected to the spirit, how is it connected to God, how is it connected to life, and how does the art bring us to those kinds of places. Unnamable. Why waste precious time worrying if arc or cup, whether streak or stream? Do you understand what we mean by green? Why keep wanting answers to why this, why that, why rose, why scratch, and who is what? We pretend we don't pretend when we name, when we imply or provide a personal pronoun for what is a Gnostic art. We substitute name for knowing, as if to gender what is without need of it, as if to represent what is without us within, because we don't have time not to frame the limitations of our senses. We come to these windows, so it's as if at last we're giving up our eyes, the better to figure the unformed, forfeiting our fingertips to texture the tints of an invisible God. Here we can name pigment, melted light, name light, umber, name umber, shape, dimension, where we can move out of time and place till finally we're able to see nothing and to be uncertain where we are or when or why, what is as if solid and what is like water or shadow, what is foreground or foregone, conclusion or the question. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. Those were amazing and wonderful. I never know what to expect with poetry, and sometimes it's just a deep kick in your heart. And those were wonderful and powerful. And I'm seeing lots and lots of comments in the sidebar. So I'm glad I'm saving this for the two of you, because there's a lot of really powerful comments. And whew, okay, I don't know how many times I can say that was powerful, but I'm feeling it many, many times. Thank you to both of you for wonderful poetry readings. If anybody has any questions that they would like to put into the chat or the Q&A feature before we wrap up this evening, we'd love to answer them now. I have a question first for LR. P is your favorite letter. Do you have a least favorite letter? I have you muted before you begin. So if you can unmute. Oh, try again.
Better?
Yes.
That's such a funny question. No, I've never thought about my least favorite letter. I don't think I have one.
Okay. What is it about P that is it the popping, the powerfulness of P that what makes you love it so?
I think that, our sense of music and sound in language comes from the mechanics and kind of organic function of our making those sounds. And there is, I believe, just something extremely pleasurable from that particular letter. And, you know, the more P's, the better. I have a contest now with my favorite 8-year-old Aurora, where we are competing with our P sentences and words all the time. And I can see that as a child, the incredible delight she has in just saying those words and the feel in her mouth and her lips. So I think it's all about that.
Excellent. Alice, do you have a favorite letter?
Well, it's funny because I actually have a poem with around the letter P as well. It's in my book, Be That Empty, and it's called Disturbance. And the poem came from seeing this exhibit up at the Montshire Science Museum about water flow and how if you move a rock, the way that the water flows around it that's called disturbance. And or even something in wind that's breaking up the wind is called disturbance. And I just thought, I mean, we usually think of disturbance as a bad thing, but we can really affect something and make beauty out of the way that water or air flows around something. I want to be a disturbance. So I wanted to use that letter P in every line because it's a plosive that makes your mouth close. This is what you were saying, LR. It makes your mouth close and then pop the air out of it like wind. And so we are creating a disturbance with our mouths, even as we're trying to speak. It's like there's this tension there. So I might say that P is my favorite letter too.
Excellent, excellent. It's a popular choice. Popular choice. Wonderful. All right, we have a question here for you, Alice, from Kyla. Alice, what makes you write your poetry in that layout? Is it an artistic choice or to visibly show the tone of something else or something else?
Oh, I like this question. You know, my poems take a lot of different shapes, but often each book kind of has its own basic structure to it. The structure is really important to me. And so in this book, I really wanted to mimic the artwork on the page. And that's why it looks like that. And also just the pauses in our minds as we kind of think something and then we pause and then we maybe rethink it. So I wanted to mimic that kind of space, but frame it in that moment of time. None of my other books or none of my other poems elsewhere look like that.
How do you discover your art? The paintings.
Oh, how do I find that paintings? I was held up from moving much in my life for about a year or so. I had an injury, and so I spent a lot of time online looking for art, and people knew that I was looking for it. So I got, and I get a lot of art magazines, and I, read a lot about art. So I was just looking for it all the time, and friends would send me things and connections and all that. So that's how I found a lot of it. And then I started writing to these artists, most of whom I didn't know. Some of them I did. And some of them I ended up having correspondences with, which was just so generous of them and really fun.
All right, wonderful. LR, question to you from Catherine. LR, can you talk about the pandemic as inspiration and also crushing?
Well, I think, Catherine, you've just said it. I found it quite difficult to write during the pandemic. And, finding a way to talk about social issues without it falling flat on the page is a challenge. So when I found myself naturally having I was playing with the word up in that poem, which of course has a P, and and just found that working with the language and weaving that word up into the poem made it possible for me to enter in a kind of quirky way and have a kind of rant, which was deeply needed from day to day.
And a question from David again for LR. Can you please talk about how the poem moves through you to the page, and thence from the first rendering to the poem that feels completely complete to you?
Oh, David. Poems, as I mentioned with the P poem, I never know where a poem is going. And so it's kind of a treasure hunt. I often have images or a phrase that I'm working with, and I will write a number of different kinds of pieces, and then I am taxed with finding a way to make a relationship out of all those pieces and put it together. And for me, poems never feel really complete. I was sharing at another reading that a mentor of mine, really important influence for me, was Adrienne Rich. And I remembered her saying that poems were never completed by the poet. They were always completed by the one who received them, bringing their own experience and associations and memories to the poems. So then I didn't feel too worried about them not being so-called finished.
That's beautiful. I like that a lot. I think we will end our evening with one last question for each of you. A reminder to our audience that both of these books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. I would like to ask each of you, do your poems teach you anything?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, you're writing down what you know, but the poems for me, they show me the way, they show me all that I don't know as it gets unfolded. So that's part of what's so exciting about writing them, both because I never know. It's also what's so exasperating because I never know where they're taking me. And when they do, there's just the revelations that come from the poem itself, as if I had no idea or couldn't get there myself without the poem taking me.
And Alice, do poems teach you anything?
I would say it's kind of a similar process for me too. It teaches me to write, teaches me about language. And I know that it's common to say that, language has its limits and we can't really express things, but I'm so in love with language that I don't really believe that. I just think I personally can't do everything with the language, but if I could only go farther, the language would do it for me. It would happen. So I'm constantly learning how to play with the language and make it spring up even more.
Two excellent answers. Thank you so much to the both of you for a wonderful evening of verse. We are so pleased that you joined us. Thank you again to our audience members at home. We are recording this and we'll put it on YouTube in about a week or two. So thank you so much. If you know anybody who might have enjoyed this poetry reading, please do send the link to them. We will send it to you in your Eventbrite emails. Again, thank you so much to the two of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for hosting so nicely, and great to see you and hear you, LR. Thank you all for coming too.
And you too, Alice. I am so inspired by the way that your mind, I can feel the way your mind is working in these poems, and it's such an inspiration. And I feel so at home in that mind. So thank you.
Nice. Great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you all.